see it. And you should be able to hear it. Hey, Fabio, I've got this microphone for you. I don't know if you have a place inside or somewhere you can stash it. All right. We're going to get started here in about a minute. Find a chair. If you need a chair, we can get a chair. Standing room only until we're full of chairs. And if you are outside, you want to come inside, now is the time. All right, we've got Vic and Hollywood with some chairs. Yeah, let's bring a couple and fill them in here. We also have a nice couch over here as a fill-in. You're going to be standing, sir.
Oh, man.
Yeah, then you get to sit. Only after you speak, then you get to sit. All right, let's make sure we are recording. We are live. We've got audio working there. All right, how's everybody doing today? Happy Friday, right? No, it's almost Friday. All right, well, welcome everybody. We have a special treat for you. We have a special guest speaker, Fabio Gratton. Is that about right?
Close enough.
I like to roll my T's and R's when I can. But this is going to be set up as an informal meet and greet where he's just going to share a little bit about his story. And then I'm going to sit down with him over this nice, cozy fire. Willing suspension of disbelief, everyone. And then we will ask him about what it really means to try to make gold out of all the elements that you see in your life. All right, without further ado, unless you're holding onto a crouton and a spicy sauce for your pizza, I need you to clap. Ready? Let's go. Let's clap it up. All right, come on over, Fabio. You are all set. Your microphone, you can't sit down until you do your intro.
My intro. All right. Hi, nice to meet everyone. I thought I was going to get like drum rolls and introductions. All right. So I don't know, probably some of you have met me before. I know I see some faces in here. So I'm Fabio, and as you might have read on the website, if you read websites, is I've been in the entrepreneurial space for about 22 years. I've had the pleasure, fortune, and the war drama of having sold 4 companies and built about 7. And many failures in between, as all of you that will start companies or have started companies know. I started my career in Hollywood as a screenwriter. Actually, taking a step back, I actually started my career working for Tom Cruise in Hollywood, making him coffee and learning what it means to make great coffee. Seriously, like I would make coffee for him every single day. And if you guys want to know the pain of working your way up in the world, he would, this is the time when there wasn't really cell phones. So the only way you knew he was coming to the lot was when they would tell you, Tom Cruise is coming. And my job was to make the perfect cup of coffee for Tom Cruise. And the only thing, the perfect cup of coffee for Tom Cruise was the one that had just finished brewing. So you can imagine how difficult it is. You don't know he's coming in. You don't get phone calls. And sometimes people aren't checking the windows. How many times that pot would end, and then I'd count 1001, 1002, 1003. And they'd say, out. Pour it out, put it back in, and start all over again. That's what I did for about a year. No, I also got to do a lot of other things for Tom Cruise. He was married to Nicole at the time, so it was before the Oprah jumping on the couch days. And but now he's back, right? So I've been very lucky. So how the heck did I end up from there into what I ended up doing next, which is I went into healthcare. And the reason I went into healthcare to do healthcare advertising was I failed miserably at screenwriting. And what I mean by that is I wrote 9 screenplays and none of them sold. And I was having an identity crisis. My dad said, it's too late for you to become a professor. And I was like, oh shit, I can't do that. He's like, maybe you go to law school. I'm like, I could try that. I'm like, but the screenwriting thing isn't really working. I started taking temp jobs and I'm like, hey, just place me anywhere that's creative because I'm a writer. I was here down in Irvine, and unfortunately, the idea of like being a writer for a job doesn't really exist. It didn't exist at the time. I don't know if many of you would go online right now and find a job that's probably being all written by robots. So I tried that, and they put me at a healthcare advertising agency. And at that point, I went in, and they were doing, it was like 1999, and they were just starting to do direct-to-consumer advertising for pharmaceutical products. And direct-to-consumer advertising for pharmaceutical products were just big billboards with a headline, couple holding hands, prostate cancer, and go talk to your doctor. Hasn't changed at all in 22 years. And I went in and I'm like, well, where's the story? Where's the fun? Where's the innovation? And I was the intern. I was the temp, then I was the intern, then I was a freelancer, and what started my career was just me asking the question of, well, two questions actually. One of them was the easy one of them was the hard one. The first question I asked was, there's got to be a better way to do this, right? There's got to be a better way to engage people with healthcare problems, and how do we do that? And I'll talk hopefully more about it as we converse. But the second one, which was the much harder problem, is, am I giving up on my dream? Like, is this it? Is this the moment where I have to decide if I want to be really good at this, I can't be really good at both things, and do I have to commit? And I struggled with that. I struggled with that a lot because that was my passion. I thought this was what I was going to do. I spent my whole life since I was 10 years old thinking first I was going to be an actor, then I was going to be a director, then I was going to be a writer, and then I was going to be a producer. And I had this huge dream of being very successful in Hollywood. And now I'm at a healthcare ad agency in Irvine, and I'm thinking, am I kidding myself? Am I lying to myself, telling myself that this is the opportunity of a lifetime just because I wanted to make some money? And so I started really thinking about, like, why do I tell stories? Why do I want to tell stories? And that led me to asking myself, well, I want to change lives. And that led me to, well, there's no better way to change lives than saving lives and helping lives and communicating about life-saving therapies. And I'm like, and here they respect me. Here they listen to my ideas, and I have a chance at actually having a way to communicate. As I looked at my screenplays collecting dust on the shelf, I thought to myself, that's not going anywhere. But maybe this path is a chance for me to actually have a voice. And so I committed, and I've never, ever looked back because it changed my life. I was able to build an agency, was able to build it to one of the biggest agencies in the country in healthcare, started the first digital agency in healthcare in the country and sold that, and more after that. And it just taught me one thing right away, which is, man, like, at the end of the day, what was stopping me? What was my fear? What was the thing that made me have that block? And how many times I've seen that again and again with people that I meet as I get older. It's this fear of, like, maybe, am I doing the right thing, the wrong thing? There is no answer, right? You have to pick a path, you have to commit, and then you have to decide whether you're doing it for the right reasons. I had no idea what the right reasons were. What I do know is that over time, what I've learned is, like, make your own life, make your own legend, make your own journey. It's not that person's or that person's. It's like, what do I have inside me that makes me special? And maybe it's not that special to everybody or to the whole world, but what I had was a desire to tell a story, to help people, save lives, and this opportunity that presented itself to be in healthcare. And I said, damn, I'm going to take it. And I took it. And it's changed everything for me. I'm very, very grateful for that. It's led to everything else that came after, including meeting my wife, which then led to my kids. And then circling back around with my dad, who's in healthcare. So it's brought a lot of joy to me in my life. That's a lot about me. All right, what are we going to do here? We're going to talk a little.
Well, they have to clap. You have to wait for them to clap.
I was not ready for that.
We also have a chance for a little bit of question. So does anybody have a peering question at this point with this interesting backlit of his story? If not, it's okay. You can come up with more. Just giving you a chance here. No? No questions? There you go. All right, here you go.
So what would you say that, like, did you have a moment of realization, like a specific point that you could focus on where you thought, this is what I want to do? Like a very, like, a day or a conversation you had that really struck that?
At that moment, it's going to sound really pathetic. Here's kind of how it went down. So when you sell a screenplay in Hollywood, like if you want to be a really successful Hollywood screenwriter, you could sell a screenplay for, say, like $1 million. That's like at the time, that was like the big selling a screenplay for $1 million. And I was like, you're set for life. Well, you have a writing partner, so you maybe have to divide that 50-50, and then your lawyer takes 20%, and then your agent takes 30%, and then you have to pay taxes, and then, okay, so maybe by the time you're all done, maybe $130,000 goes in your pocket. The reason I'm telling you all this is because, so here I was at this healthcare agency, my first couple weeks, and the partner at that firm takes me down to meet with Cardinal Health. You guys know Cardinal Health, big company that was down in San Diego, and they made, these Pyxis station boxes. They're like supply stations where you swipe your card to avoid medication errors, and this big meeting, and he's like, hey, come down with me. I'm like, I don't know anything. He's like, just come down with me. So I went down with him, and we're sitting there at the table, and he's just watch. And so there's all these like executives, really, really smart people, and they're talking about how do they create excitement around this box that basically is like a vending machine for medication. And they're talking and talking and talking, and I kind of nudge partner. They're looking for the big idea, and I'm like, these are like kind of like superheroes, right? And he's like, yeah. So, and I'm like, well, couldn't we make like an animated series about them and distribute them through digital channels? This is 1999. And he's like, what do you mean digital? I go, executable, send them via email before it was virus scans. And he's like, what are you talking about? Cartoons sent via email to all the nurses and doctors and administrators? And I go, yeah. I was like, why not? And then he goes, well, how much would that cost? I'm like, I don't know. He goes, just give me a number. There's like whispering in the back of the room. I said, I don't know, 100? He goes, 200? I go, I don't know. That's a lot. And he goes, so he gets up in front of the room and goes, so we have an idea. And he literally at that moment, and I'm like, oh shit. He goes, in front of all these executives, he pitches that idea, and he says, hey, what about superheroes, all your Pyxis stations done as animated heroes, distributed digitally, and everybody's like, and I'm like, oh, here we go, last day on the job. And then they're like, well, how much is that gonna cost? And he's like, $500,000. And they're all like, you reach across the table, they shake his hand, they're like, great, show us first draft next week. And at that moment, so this is the true story. Like I could give you the other version, which is like, oh, I went out in the smoking peyote in the desert. No, that was the moment where we were back in the car, and the business partner looked at me and he goes, so how do we do it? And I go, I have no idea. And he goes, well, you figure it out. I go, I'm going to need a team. I'm going to need people. We're going to need, and he's like, whatever you want. Why this matters is not the idea. What mattered is at that moment, somebody had just given me like freedom and believed in me and given me this opportunity, and I got to be creative, and it was crazy, and it was way more money than I would ever make screenwriting. I mean, obviously the money wasn't coming to me. I was getting paid $12 an hour as a freelancer at the time, but what did occur to me at that moment was, wow, there's a career that can be built out of being creative, telling great stories, using interesting technologies, and I have to see where this goes because my 9 dust collecting scripts on my shelf were doing nothing. Nobody's gonna read them. They're never gonna be published. Nobody reads screenplays on Kindle. It's like, that's it, that was the end. And so at that moment I realized this is an outlet for creativity, and I have to see where this goes because this is what I wanna do. I wanna entertain people, or I wanna engage with people. So from that moment on, that's the moment that I knew that I had to pursue it. And what happened after that was it happened over and over and over again. And it just became mixing shit. It was like, oh, like we're dealing with clients with first HIV product ever. And they would say like, what do we do to launch this? And I was like, well, let's create an animated series, kind of Sin City style that like gets distributed via episodes, via Facebook. This is like V1 of Facebook, right? And they're like, okay, how much? And I was like, I don't know. And then it became like $1 million, $2 million. And before you knew it, I realized that there was a market for doing something very innovative in this space. And that was enticing, exciting, addictive, and I didn't want to stop. It was like, and then you can attract really great people too, because when people are like, hey, like all the talent in the world does not go into healthcare, right? So all the talent was going to the big agencies wanting to do Burger King, McDonald's, and Taco Bell. So then people start seeing what you're doing. They're like, well, that's really cool stuff. And you're like, come on over. And we started getting like incredible talent that wanted to join this crazy ragtag bunch. And then the partner, the one that had been there that first day, he goes, hey, I'm out of here. He had been bought out by another big company. He's like, I'm going to go start a new company. He goes, you want to go do it? guy didn't blink. I was like,
$500,000.
No.
Well, this is truly alchemy, truly gold. Give him a round of applause. All right, here we go. Let's get this.
I wish.
Now, we don't have a fire, but we have an orchid, so this is officially an orchid side chat.
Oh,
It's safer for heat and everything.
question.
All right, feel free to have a seat, and you can hang on to that or put that right there if there are any questions. Well, welcome to this orchid side chat.
Orchid side chat.
And by an orchid side chat, I mean that everyone is involved here. So if you can't feel the heat, if you want to raise your hand, you want to get involved, this is an open discussion, big fire pit here. Alchemy. How many people have heard of alchemy? Okay, how many people could explain what alchemy is? Right, all right. 1, 2, 3. How about you explain what alchemy is, because that's what we're going to be focused on here. What is the historic practice of it? Because we're going to be pulling metaphors out of it.
Well, first of all, I think I probably made up my own version, so like, don't fact check me.
But the
here.
traditional alchemy.
Well, alchemy, mixing things together, alchemy, chemistry was like the old practice of chemistry, right?
Wasn't it specifically to try to make gold, though?
Well,
Or not? Maybe.
I don't know if it was. I don't know if it was to extract value out of minerals. I think in The Alchemist, like if people are familiar with Paulo Coelho's book, that's what inspired me. If you read that book, the journey that the kid goes on, it was about finding this like mythical, I think, alchemist that could literally take lead and turn it into gold. And I love that idea. I mean, that's kind of like our life, right? It's what we do. We live a kind of a mundane life, and then one day we have either a great idea or fall in love, or something incredible happens to our life, and suddenly it's better. Right?
Or something happens terribly wrong, and you're like, why is this happening to me? And then later on you find out that might be the mix.
Right.
How many people have read the book The Alchemist? It's about this big. Okay, if you're not raising your hand, this is something that you should read. It is one of those timeless classics that could inspire you for great things. And it's literally a story about a kid who goes on a journey to try to find and learn about alchemy. And I won't spoiler alert, but he ends up finding exactly what he's looking for, but in the spot that he never expected it to be. And I feel like that's maybe the analogy of where you're at now, because you were going to be an actor, producer, film director, screenwriter, and now you've channeled that into different areas. So as we talk about alchemy, it's really this idea of mixing and remixing and trying to experiment, knowing for the most part that it's not going to work, but the fact that you're going through the motions. So because I like the number 3, and there are 3 little pigs and 3 blind mice and 3 porridges at different temperatures, we're going to stick with 3 things here. And the first, listening to what you talked about, was the alchemy of ideas. Now, can you talk with us about it from a strategic standpoint, and from where it's not necessarily intuitive, but how important that is right now, especially with what's going on in the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think that as obvious as it seems, so I feel like some of these things are pretty obvious, but you have to kind of execute on them, which is taking 2 disparate things and putting them together can be magical, right?
But in a world where you fear like everybody's done everything and there's all these ideas and like, okay, if it's already been invented, it's been created, and like how much more new things are there to create, right? I mean, it seems like that's the default, because if it could have worked, somebody would have already done it. So how do you break that paradigm?
Well, my brother had a great saying for me once, which he called it the not knowing space. Like we have a problem. You should try this sometime. Be at a party or with friends at a bar or whatever.
Like tonight, the party tonight maybe?
Yeah.
Okay, just saying.
Somebody will say something and they'll come up with some question that you don't know the answer to, and what do you think the first thing people do is? They reach for their phones, right? Everybody wants the answer. And I remember me and my brother having this conversation, which was like, we used to live in a world like before cell phones where you had to think about ideas. And I'm not saying people don't think now. I'm just saying that you had to actually try to figure out, like, what's the answer to that? If I said, like, hey, how tall is, the Empire State Building, and you had no point of reference, you'd actually have to use all this deduction and, like, how tall are buildings, and you'd have to think about it, and that's a really unique thing. But here's where it gets really interesting. The second part of that kind of has always been my sort of, like, I used to walk 20 miles in the snow kind of thing is, we don't spend it, if we can Google every idea that we've ever had, we're never going to do anything, because every idea has been done, right?
And can you also, at this day and age, substitute, we can chat GPT that and figure it out.
Well, and
Since it is
ChatGPT will convince you that it's been done. It's been
Right.
done really well, and probably will do it for you while you turn your back and go to sleep. So the reality is, though, like I think about this all the time. Like I would have probably never done any of my stupid ideas or good ideas had I Googled it, had I had the easy ability. Because I always tell somebody, if you Google it, you're going to go like, somebody's doing it, and then you don't do it. But the reality is, two people can do the exact same thing, and we'll end up in two. You guys know this. Like if you guys do competitions and stuff, give people the exact same challenge, go off, keep them completely separate. They will come back with two completely different ideas. It's no different in business. You're going to make different decisions. Every little decision is going to give you go down a different path, and you'll end up with two different ideas. So just because somebody has done, I'm making this up, like delivery in 24 hours or food in 24 hours, everybody's going to be like, oh, that's a space I'm never going to go into. But if you're passionate about it, you have an idea, you should pursue it. Just because it's being done doesn't mean that it can't be done better or that you can't do it differently. So I think that the opportunity is in Alchemy is remembering that when you start mixing new things together, that you can actually create completely different things that nobody has ever done, that are just bewildering. I mean, and again, in innovation, I mean, you guys do a lot of innovation workshops and stuff, I imagine. We always used to do like our favorite exercise with clients was the forced analogy, which was like you take an apple or an object or anything and you just set it there and you're like, okay, how does this apple solve pancreatic cancer? Or how does this apple solve, food delivery?
How does this orchid?
How does this orchid solve? And then you force people to have to go down this path of like, well, you peel it, the things, it grows, you water it, you can like do X, Y, Z. And by the time that people peel it apart, they're like, oh, wait, it's a drone that's delivering in this way. And actually, if food comes from the top, it's much and somebody comes to a different idea, and then I think what's really important is that we never look at the world as though it's all been conquered, because I don't think it has at all. And I don't know how people feel in here when you guys are approaching ideas, if you guys are...
Well, let's ask them. Let's ask them. How many people think all the good ideas are taken? Okay, fair enough. One thing I'd like to dive a little deeper on is how much the willing suspension of your own disbelief has to do with this process. Now, the willing suspension of disbelief is what happens when you're watching a movie or watching a Netflix and you're sort of in this new rebel town or there's trolls and it's not realistic, but you're like, for now, in the next hour and a half, I'm going to believe whatever they tell me. Right? There's this willing suspension of disbelief. You walk into a theater and the lights go down and you're like, okay, it's pretend time. I have experience. I tried to get into Hollywood. I lost all my money in internships and met William Shatner, took him the wrong spot on the set, and he got really mad at me, and just all of that just disappeared. But I've always been fascinated with the willing suspension of disbelief, and that ties into storytelling. And you're talking about an apple and an orchid and how it solves cancer. You have to some extent be like, we're sort of playing a game here. We're being unrealistic in our quest of finding something that's real. How important is that element for you to be creative and to have fun and to not look at this as just square block, square hole kind of concept?
Massive. It's the biggest thing. So we used to actually we had found a technique. It's almost like waterboarding for innovation, which was we would do these sessions called golden tickets. 8 hours, we'd bring in clients, and we literally took away their cell phones, and then we moved at the speed of light. Like every 10 minutes, we would change what we were doing and these are people, like very senior people that are used to having total control. They're like, I'm going to the bathroom, and you're like, no, you're not, sit down. You didn't get permission. And like, you do that for like 2-3 hours in a row, and after a while, they start becoming like children.
Right.
And once they become like children and they start believing in this new world that you've created,
you become open to it.
They become open to it. And so, so absolutely. And we called it Golden Ticket on purpose. It was welcome to Willy Wonka land. And it's like, you never know where the Oompa Loompas are going to come in. And at first, it's cheesy. It's stupid. The clients are like this. They're like, I can't believe they've sent me down here to waste a day on this workshop. At the end, they're crying. I kid you not. Like, they're like, you just changed my life. I never thought I could see this problem in a different way. And like, oh my God, I can't believe we did this. And and they never stop talking about it. And you're like, how do you go within an 8-hour day from I hate you and everything about you and everything about this system to this changed my life? And when you see that arc that happens, you say anything's possible.
And this brings me to cognitive bias. How many people are familiar with cognitive bias? Okay, it's probably the thing that's holding you back right now. Life is all about stories, and it's about the stories you tell other people and the stories you tell yourself. And the stories that you tell yourself are the most important, because if you say, I can't do this, or this apple cannot work with this, then from an evolutionary standpoint, your brain wants to be correct. Just how we want to be right. Like, I would never be wrong. But if I'm convinced that an apple is not going to work well with this orchid to solve cancer, then I will only look for the data that supports my hypothesis. And we're a bunch of researchers, we understand that, right? It's like having skewed results. You have all this data that's looking at you, you're like, I'm going to ignore the stuff that is not part of my thesis, and I'm going to look over here. So do you think that researchers are in a better spot to tap into this creativity, or do you think the confirmation bias of just it stops at the door? If they're like, no, it can't be done, or I can't do this. Like, what bridge do you have to break in order to open up that creativity? They're not the senior executives, but they might be like shy college students that are used to being in the lab. Like, what can they do to break out of the shell to create the alchemy for these ideas? Are there exercises? Do they sit in a room for 2 hours and brainstorm? Like, is there anything that they can do?
I think great question. I mean, I think we all try to figure that out. I mean, I think that's why like incubators and accelerators are really good for people. I think it's, and you guys have like mentors and stuff too, right? Where people come in and help you guys out.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I think it's like trying to force yourself to solve a problem in a different way. It's kind of like taboo, right? Like we're taboo, like you can't use certain words. It's like game storming. Do write that down. Game storming is an incredible book. It's a methodology of innovation, and we started using it because we hated the word brainstorming, because every time somebody said let's brainstorm or let's workshop, I'm like, brain, that doesn't sound like fun. Like, who wants to use their brain to work? But game storming is like, who doesn't want to play a game, right? So which already starts the kind of cognitive like opening.
Yeah, who can come up with the most uses between this apple and that? Ready, go.
And it really is all techniques that are meant to make you think differently. In other words, it's techniques like, all right, well, you have 10 choices, but like one's called prune the tree. Put all your best ideas, and then everybody has to come up and start pruning the tree. And it just forces you to be like, it gets down to like, what are the 3 things this business really needs? And you're like, we could do that. We could just all sit down and go, what are the top 3 things our business? But when you do it through a different type of exercise, all of a sudden people are having fun. Or the dollar, the $100 test that people do all the time. It's like, okay, you've got $100. You could only you have to put your money in certain places, and you force people to have to kind of play Monopoly with their business. And all of a sudden people are like having fun, but they're actually making business decisions. Like, force people to think about problems differently. There's the inverse game. It's always been my favorite. Start with that you are the problem. How would you stop yourself, right? And then come up with all the things, and that's like, basically it forces you to think about your blind spots. Like, how do you figure out a way to stop yourself?
You become the villain.
You become the villain. You villainize your own company. You figure out all the problems with it, and you like have fun actually destroying yourself. And then you come to your own rescue. And then you're like, okay, now let's flip this around, and how do we save the company? And you come up with all the ideas that actually protect your longevity. These are just some stupid examples of like, I always like love, force yourself with games and thinking different, right? I had the luxury because I always thought in terms of movies, so I would take people on it. I'm like, okay, forget it. Like, you're in Mission Impossible right now, bias. But I'm like, okay, so we're trying to solve this thing. We're trying to get out. It's an escape room. How do we solve this problem? And you got 30 seconds, go. And people were like, what? Wait, 30 seconds, go. Like, they scramble, they trip over each other, but they come up with ideas. And that moment of getting them very uncomfortable is the moment that they start to actually open up to like new ideas. Because you got to break the thinking, right? That's where it starts. I think what you were saying, cognitive bias. The problem is that you're on a train, and it's really hard to get off that train.
And if you're in the lab and you're like, nobody's figured out how to do this solution, like it's just still a problem, it's easier to default into that train. Well, my professor hasn't solved it, and they haven't solved it.
Right.
But these students are taking wild, sometimes moonshot leaps at discoveries that they want to take or a special project. But I think that what's important is knowing that you are your own worst enemy if you've convinced yourself it's not going to happen, or that all the ideas are taken ahead of time. So it's really a mind frame.
Right.
And going back real quickly to this idea of 2 businesses in a space, if the idea already exists, it's actually some sort of market validation that there might be something for it. And I want to know, before we move on to the second topic in this alchemy conversation, I'm a big believer that you can have the best idea in the world, but if you can't articulate it in a short and compelling way, it's just no longer the best idea. So you can have 2 people with the exact same drive, with the exact same passion, with the exact same findings that are out there to market at the same time, and ye who communicates it best, who can tell the best story, is likely to have the most success. So it's like there's a certain threshold to where you can come up with these apple orchid ideas, but how important is a researcher's ability outside the lab to talk to people that don't understand science and to talk about these concepts where, like the communication of the idea. I'm curious because as a storyteller, like you found that as a power, but as a researcher, you're not necessarily, you're not thinking maybe of storytelling.
Right. And again, spending most of my career in healthcare, I got to see the best drugs not reach the biggest markets. Like, and you're talking about drugs that are for cancer, drugs for HIV, like drugs for, like, why? Communication. And you would think it's impossible. You would think that some drugs don't even reach market, actually, that have been shown to save people's lives. Why? Because the company couldn't figure out a way to communicate it to the FDA, communicate it to advocacy, communicate to their people and other people. Like, this should be no shock to anybody, of course, right? Because we know that, like, that sometimes the people who can garner the media attention, sometimes the people who can be the loudest, and sometimes people who can make things the flashiest win. And that sucks, right? Because that needs to, so then how do we arm?
How do you bridge that gap? Do you find a storyteller to join your team?
I would, if you're looking at founder teams, I would say, like, always ask yourself, if you're putting together a founder team, which most people do, I would always ask myself, do you have somebody that can sell the idea?
How many salespeople we got in the room? All right. How many researchers we got in the room? How many research salespeople we got in the room? Okay, we got one. We got two.
We have a winner. But yeah, like, I think it's really, again, this is super biased, right? But I think that I've seen over and over that a team that has like one or two people that are incredibly smart with the best idea, but they can't communicate it, are doomed at the start. But they really are. It's sad, but they're doomed at the start. Now, does that mean like you put an ad on whatever on? There must be like some entrepreneur website where you find like a leader, like.
You could join Toastmasters, or you could just admit the fact that you have an opportunity to grow in that space, and then get help and mentorship and do it 100,000 times.
I'll tell you though, like, because I think Michelle has brought me in several times to like coach teams and stuff, and this will typically happen something like this. A bunch of people sit quietly, me talking a lot like I'm doing now, and then they say, and then at the end they're like, yeah, well, that's easy for you to say because like you talk and you know how to talk and and I'm like, hold on. I'm like, it's actually a good story is a good story. And you don't have to be a good presenter to tell a good story. I said, so let's stop with I'm not charismatic, I don't know how to pace or pose like when I'm on stage. So we did that team, I remember 4 years ago, where they were all like that. They were like, oh, my idea. And I said, let's just focus on the narrative. Let's just make your narrative really strong and compelling. And then it's a script and just enunciate, right? Just, and they won the competition. I think it was just because they told the best story. They didn't really change that much else. They just rearranged their slides. They started with something a better hook. Like things that, again, I'm sure that you guys learn about and all the time, but I think people will go online, they'll Google, now ChatGPT, create me the best pitch deck, whatever. It's still like, if everybody's doing the same thing, you're not going to stand out. So it's going to force you to have a better hook, a better story. And, and I think that I would just strongly urge people not to think that presentation is everything. Story is, however. Story is absolutely everything. It starts with story because a great idea, if you can't tell the story, it doesn't matter. Great science, can't tell the story, it doesn't matter. If you can't tell, I was lucky. I had nothing else but the story. I had no skills, right? Apparently. So I was flipped around. I'm like, I was like a good storyteller looking for a story to tell. But, some people have incredible things to do in the world, incredible lives they can change, and they don't know how to tell a story. But I would start with plot. I would always warn people, start with plot. Don't worry about presentation. Start with plot, which means sequence. A, B, C, D. What do you say first? What do you say second? What do you say third? And obsess about sequence. Like us screenwriters, we used to put everything on postcards and put them up on walls, and we used to
storyboard.
Storyboard. I would say storyboard your story. It's like, and figure out the best way to create tension. Not solution, tension. Another mistake that people make, they think, here's my problem, here's my solution. Ah, come on, really? And here's all my data, here's the addressable market, here's how much money I need. Nah, tension, potential solution, more tension, maybe solution. When you watch a movie, right? Like, what do? You gotta keep watching things that don't resolve, right? It's why you tune in for binge watch Netflix series, right? You're like, oh my God, it's not resolved. We're consumers. Your investors are consumers. Consumers are consumers. So we want to stay hooked. And I think a lot of people are like, I'm not comfortable. By the way, Big Pharma does this all the time in the market. It's like they're not comfortable staying in the problem long enough, and they're not comfortable telling you more about the problem after they've told you about the solution. But a great story is like, there's a problem. I have an idea, but shit, I can't get my idea done because there's these other 3 problems. But we could solve them doing A by C. Yeah, but that might not happen because of these problems. That's a good story. And people are so terrified of finding out that your story your business has so many problems. But what the investors are doing is, first of all, they're paying attention. Second of all, they're leaning in. And third of all, they trust you.
Yeah, nobody wants to listen to facts and figures. Like your actual brain is set up to receive stories before stats. So the original part of your brain, your stem brain, is actually functions so that you don't die. Like, that's all it's worried about. And usually it looks for threats like bears and woolly mammoths and phone calls from your ex or stuff like that, right? And so if you're in a situation where you are presenting and you're like, here's the data that I found, and blah, 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 like you're literally a bear jumping out and attacking somebody. And it won't go past the stem brain because they're like, this is a threat. I don't know about this. I haven't been acquainted. I don't know what room I'm in. And you can only get people to use their prefrontal cortex once you've gotten them to accept that you're not a threat. And so having a plot with tension. Another great book is Story Trumps Structure. Nothing to do with the T word. This is like a fiction writer who talks about creating tension and believably unescapable situations where things actually, they get worse. And then but it's believable. But then it actually gets worse. But then it's believable. But you think they're going to, and then it gets worse. So I think this idea of starting with the plot, mapping out what your narrative is, can help you articulate what you're trying to get across. How many people feel like they're good storytellers? Okay, I'm going to ask another question because now we can get a gauge. On a scale of 0 to 10, say out loud on the count of 3 the level at which you are from a storytelling perspective. So if you're 5, like say 5 and say it loud and proud. Okay, think of 0 to 10. 1, 2, 3. 6. Like 6, 8, 6, 8-ish, 8-ish, 6, 6-ish. All right, on a scale of 0 to 10, how confident and passionate are you about your research or what you're trying to make or build or problem solve? Scale of 0 to 10, 1, 2, 3. 10. So you've got like a 10 or a 9 passion, research, and ability, and you've got like a 6, 7, or 8, and it's really just about probably investing as much time as you do in your research and your lab skills as it is in reading and researching and watching and finding ideas that have come to life through story.
Absolutely.
So mixing things together, we're talking ideas and ideation. Now let's talk about mixing people together. We somewhat touched on it, but as you're in college and you're networking and you're meeting these new people and you're still trying to figure out who you are, and you're like, oh, am I my major? Am I my club? Am I who I grew up? Am I my culture? And sort of we take on all these different scenes and people, and we don't know, and we know we need networking, but we don't know what to do, and then we're standing next to somebody and we just go like this. Right? So like, what is the power and value of alchemy with people, and how does that play out in real life, and how can that translate to students who are like, I know I need to network, but I really don't know what that means?
I mean, I'm biased because
we already understand.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah.
I'm biased. I mean, I think that, first of all, like if you're entrepreneurs, you're founders, or you're collaborators of any sort, I know we were talking earlier, but big bias towards like, if you're going to start a company, have a co-founder. So that's my bias. It's not just my bias. You hear about it from like Y Combinator and other startups. And it's not just because it's like, well, nobody, you can recruit anybody to join your cause. That's part of it. But more importantly, because shit gets tough, right? like in life. Like things get hard, you need a friend. Co-founders are your business friend. And there's somebody, like when you slip down that hill, somebody's gonna have to grab your arm and pull you back up before you completely destroy yourself. So I think that in business and entrepreneurship, having a co-founder can be very valuable. Now what that looks like, shares, equity, structures, is CTO, designer, like all that, there's a lot more in there. I would probably, the easy answer there I would give you guys is like you're doing, recommend a book, The Founder's Dilemma, which is like, I think one of the best books that covers the topics of co-founders.
Have you read Slicing Pie?
No, I haven't.
You should check out Slicing Pie.
Is it about similar?
It is very similar about how you slice the pie
Yeah.
of the company. And so
Yeah.
it's fascinating to try to understand that with no experience. You're like, I just don't get it, and then you make all the mistakes. But if you actually learn from people who've been there, done that, have tested it, have studies around it, and more than one piece of information
Right.
that backs it up. So mixing people's a good
Mixing
idea.
people's good, and they don't have to be co-founders. Then there's the team, like all the other people involved. And I think probably one of the biggest things I've ever found interacting with university students is it's interesting because sometimes you're forced into a team, sometimes you're not. Sometimes you just like bumped into somebody, or sometimes it's your friend or your roommate. And then I hear horror story after horror story after horror story. It always ends up badly. It's like, oh, this person's not putting in enough time. This person's not committed. This person's now leaving across the country, and they're going to go do something else, but they own 50% of the company. What do I do? It's like, always a total nightmare. Read Founder's Dilemma because it's about like that. In fact, they have a chapter, I think, called Slicing the Pie. That's more about the equity part. But there are studies, and you guys are researchers, there are studies that have been done that actually literally show you what is your likelihood of success based on, is it a friend, is it a wife, is it a spouse, is it a, is it a male, is it a female, is it two teams, two-person team, three-person team, CTO, and they just did studies, like thousands and thousands of people, and they said, here's like for one of my favorites is like friends. Friends rarely work well as co-founder, but that's not actually all of it. What's true is the people that work really, really well are the ones that have worked together. Anybody who's worked together, their likelihood of success if they become co-founders is significantly higher than just about anybody else. Why? Duh. Because you know how they work. And guess what you do when you start a company? You work. You don't play. You don't go around to bars. You work. So again, it's pretty obvious, but they give you these really interesting like cliff notes of like how to. I did it all wrong, by the way. I read this book way too late, but like at least I got to learn why everything was wrong that I did. But honestly, you guys, as you think about things, they are the things that could destroy companies. Probably the second biggest thing that can destroy a company after just a bad idea and bad execution is the team, the founders. People that don't trust each other, people that want to work together, people that start betraying each other, people that want, it's my idea, I deserve more. It's like a horrible thing. You lose friendships, you lose your mind, and then you lose your passion for inventing anything.
You guys excited yet?
Yeah.
Well, I can relate in making a lot of mistakes when it comes to business partners. And the challenging part about experience is that you only get it after you need it. And so I wish I would have read this book well before. I wish somebody could have told me about that red flag or that. And so this kind of transitions into the next. Is like, as you're in college, like you don't have the experience.
Right.
You can read all the books you want, but sometimes you actually have to fall on your face and actually have the scar or the crooked nose to actually learn the lesson that you shouldn't or should do something. So how do you motivate people to fall on their face? How do you motivate people to constantly reset? They have an idea, they have a founder, and then it fails, or they enter into a competition, they think they're going to win, then they don't. It's like constantly restarting at zero. How do you not feel that you're constantly at a deficit? And what does alchemy of your own sort of like discovery look like, right? Because we're talking about ideas, it's not us. Then we're talking about people, and obviously it's not us, it's them. But what about us? How do you play with the alchemy in failing some sort of a midterm or thinking that you're good at something or you're not, or, the path that you thought was on is no longer, that door has shut. How do you stay motivated, and how does that sort of build into gold at the end of the day? Because you're kind of in that situation right now, right?
Yeah.
You've exited a third company, and now you're like, now what, right? But
Yeah.
college students are like, now what? What am I doing now, and what am I going to do in the future? It's just like,
Well, I mean, I can tell. I don't know the answer. I don't have.
We know your bias.
Not on this.
Okay.
This I'm just right. No, no. But like when I sold my previous company, this is relevant. It's not just to remind you of that. I remember there was a period of time, Bella, my daughter, was 6 months old, and we were just like, okay, we just need to go off and do nothing. And everybody at my job that I had left, because it was my own company, was like, what are you gonna go do? Like, I know you're gonna go build another company, and that's what you're gonna do. And I was like, nah, and they didn't believe me. I was like, I'm not gonna go build another company. They said, but what are you gonna do? And I said, I'm just gonna take some time off. All right, so we wandered around and whatever, and then I started thinking about what do I like. At the time I was reading a book, I forgot what it's called Bell Labs. It's an incredible book about like the creation of all this invention, like, I don't know.
You guys writing these down? Because I'm writing these down.
It's an incredible book about entrepreneurs, like this period of time where like 20 or 30 of the greatest minds ever like happened to work at Bell Labs in their labs and invented a bunch of incredible shit that changed the world, like seriously changed the world. And really the concept of it, it's totally like, now it seems so cliche, but the concept of it was this person wanted to create an environment where it would just, by serendipity, people would just bump into each other. Now again, we've codified this into incubators and all this stuff. But it was just simply the idea of like, what if you put a bunch of really smart people together and just see what the hell happens and let them bump into each other like atoms? And I was like, that's a pretty cool idea. So I thought to myself, well, what if I could just pick all my favorite people that I enjoyed working with over the years, and just start slowly luring into them some idea, but I had to have an idea, and I didn't have an idea, which was the problem. So I started with this idea. I'm like, yeah. They're like, what are you doing? I'm like, well, I have this company. And they're like, what's it called? And I'm like, Alchemy. Literally, it was like that. And they're like, well, what's Alchemy do? I'm like, I can't tell you yet. I'm like, well, are you interested? They're like, well, if you tell me more. I'm like, I can't tell you.
Tension.
Yeah, I can't tell you more unless you join me. And so I slowly convinced like 4 or 5 people to join me. And they're like, what are we doing? You're gonna have me leave my job and all this stuff. And I said, we're going to go to the Ritz-Carlton. And they're like, well, what are we gonna do there? I'm like, we're gonna talk.
We're going to find out how this apple solves cancer.
Yeah, and so we went to the Ritz-Carlton, and we started talking about what we love to do. And we loved working together, we loved talking, we loved doing this. We spent 3-4 hours drinking coffee, eventually moved into cocktails. And then they're like, what do we do tomorrow? And I'm like, anybody know any other hotels? And somebody was like, yeah, I know this other hotel. I'm like, see you guys there. And this is literally what we did for 3 months, is we just went hotel to hotel, free Wi-Fi, and really comfortable couches. And it was this group of people that didn't need too much money, and we just would talk about things that made us excited until we had this like little inkling of an idea of a voice research company that ended up becoming one of the companies I recently sold. That was just like, hey, do you think if people could just automatically do interviews and like you could do this in healthcare, do you think anybody would buy it? And I'm like, I don't know, that sounds pretty cool. And I'd call up people that I knew in the industry, and I'm like, hey, I have this product, which I didn't have. I'm like, would you pay $5,000 for that? And they were like, yeah, I'd try it once. And I'm like, guys, we have a business, And it started like that, and we just thought it was like, we just thought we were literally conning everybody. We were just like, this is just gonna be fun. We're just gonna hustle and just figure out a way to just keep going hotel to hotel forever. Of course, we had no idea what we were doing. But the idea there is just doing something was the thing. Is we just started marching forward, talking about ideas, and eventually that became a company, and another company was born, and another company was born. So we started like 4 or 5 companies over the course of time, and 12 years later, fortunately, sold them all. But it all just started with this idea of like, let's just start moving in a direction that we all think we like, and figure out who we want to become in this next chapter of life. And so, I don't know, it's not for everybody, but I think that space of the not knowing, I want to bring it back there. Being comfortable with being absolutely terrified is something that is really, really hard for people to do. They need answers, they need stability, they need direction. I think I'm probably the king amongst my friends of being okay with being completely clueless and being okay with it, because they're always like, Fabio, you're so comfortable not knowing what's going to happen next. And I'm like, oh yeah, I am. Because I know that what comes next, if you get past it, is awesome. But you got to get past it, and that's the hard part. It's like grit your teeth and kind of grind your way through the period of being absolutely terrified that you won't figure it out, that you're gonna fail, that you're gonna suck, and you might. But if you don't get through it, you actually will never know. And so it's the getting through it, I think, that really matters, because most people, 90% of the people I know, they're like, not for me. Like, not for me. I want a job. I want stability. I want this. I want that. But you guys all know there's no such thing, right? 6 months later, they lose their job, and they're like, I need another job. And I'm like, so why don't you just go do what you really want and love, right? There's a line in The Alchemist that's like, you know, you can't really get that far from your heart, so you might want to listen to it.
Awesome. Round of applause for that. Like it. Now, the good news is that you are all in a spot where you don't know what you're doing. And the good news is that you don't have to go to a fancy hotel. You have dorm rooms and creative spaces and Europe spaces and the Entrepreneur Center. And the good news is, like, you're kind of in this transitionary phase where you don't really have a full-time job. You're sort of a full-time student. And so all of the elements of alchemy that he just shared, which is getting friends together in a non-pressure environment, in creative spaces, and finding how apples and orchids can work together, not being afraid to not know what you're doing, but just moving forward, and momentum creates momentum. And so whether it's from ideas or people or the fact that you don't know what's going on, those are the exact elements it sounds like you need in order for you to actually feel comfortable being uncomfortable and ending up in a chair talking with people in college in a few years once you've been through that, but you're not there yet. So is anybody motivated about not knowing anything and just doing something to figure it out? Yeah. All right. Well, it brings us to time, and I want to stay true to the schedule. So we're gonna probably not have questions and answers now, so we can make this transition, so we can start sharply at 5. If you do have any pressing questions, I encourage you to either find him in this transition and ask him, or maybe connect with him on LinkedIn, or maybe on Instagram, or maybe connect. Because the best piece of advice I've ever gotten is that, well, it starts as a math equation. How many can tell me the minimum number of dots to make a line? 2. Yes. And so this is just a dot. You have to throw the next dot on the board and connect with them on LinkedIn. You have to throw the next dot in order for it to connect again. But at any given point in any relationship, any of these alchemy, you can't just be satisfied with one dot. You just have to keep throwing dots up on the board. Sometimes they're darts in the dark, but you just keep throwing, tossing, and you get there. Well, on behalf of the Entrepreneur Center, Angie, will you throw me that white shirt that's right there? Now, I know you're a 4-times founder, but we would like to give you an official Entrepreneur Founder shirt. These are very sacred, and they only go to people who make the full commitment to take that leap, even if they don't know what they're doing. So, round of applause as we have our newest founder.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, and that wraps us up. Sharon, would you like to give directions in the next step here?
Sure, yeah. So for everyone staying for the celebratory dinner for Research Discovery Program and Fabio Gratton Fellowship Award recognition, if you haven't already checked in, you can check in at the desk out here. And for Research Discovery Program participants, if you could see our poster boards and put a sticky Post-it note up to answer some of our questions out there. And then very shortly after that, take a seat and we'll get started.
All right, round of applause again. And before you go, we need a picture here. So Fabio, you go there, so nobody has to move very far. You're in the middle with your founder's shirt. And then I'll take this on an angle this way so that most people are going to get in here. There we go. We got almost everybody here. All right, Fabio, you come up here, front and center there with your founder's shirt. All right, everybody else get some supportive dots on. Right here like this. Okay, there's one horizontal, and then you got to get one for the kids at the gram. All right. Enjoy the rest of the night, everybody.
Thanks, bud. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you very much, Ryan.
You're welcome. Thanks, buddy.
My name is Arya.
Hi.
It was great to listen
How
to
are
your
you?
talk.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm a grad student at UCI.
Okay.
It's very kind to turn one of my ideas into a company.
Yeah?
So it's an idea about having a portable platform for cancer diagnosis.
Uh-huh. Yeah,
For-
you're back.
For cancer diagnosis.
Oh, wow.
Yes,
Okay.
that's what I'm
You want to hit the stop
I believe
so you can
that
go